What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. For more than 900 days, we've been living through a conflict that has reshaped the world both in terms of geopolitics and the daily lives of millions. This war, which started with the invasion of Ukraine, has now reached a critical point. As we mark day 908 of this war, a new and potentially decisive chapter has begun: Ukraine's incursion into the Kursk region. What at first seemed like a minor operation has rapidly evolved into significant military engagement, forcing global powers, military strategists, and ordinary citizens to reconsider the trajectory of this conflict. The initial reaction to Ukraine's move into Kursk was mixed. Many, especially those in the Russian military establishment, they dismissed it as a mere PR stunt or a psychological operation, a distraction intended to draw attention away from other fronts. But as the days progressed, it became clear that this was no mere show of force. The Ukrainian army was committed, and their objectives were far more strategic than anyone had anticipated. Even within Russia, there was a shift in tone. General Gurylev, a member of the Russian parliament and the supporter of the war, and obviously the Z propagandist, he publicly acknowledged that this operation was not something that could be easily brushed aside. He admitted that pushing the Ukrainians back out of Kursk region would take time, a stark contrast to the overconfidence that has often characterized Russian military rhetoric. This was a significant moment, signaling that even those at the highest levels of Russian power were beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. The first day of Ukraine's incursion into Kursk was met with skepticism. Many analysts and commentators, particularly those aligned with the Russian government, they view it as a minor operation, perhaps even a distraction. It was easy to see why they might think this way. After all, Ukraine had carried out similar operations in the past, quick strikes that were more about making a statement rather than achieving any lasting military objective. However, by day 2, the true nature of the operation began to emerge. This was no mere raid, it was a coordinated military effort with clear strategic goals. Ukrainian forces were not just crossing into Russian territory, they were establishing a presence, digging in, and preparing for what looked like a prolonged engagement. The initial assumptions that this was just another skirmish began to fade, replaced by the realization that Ukraine was serious about this incursion. For Russia, this was a wake-up call. The country's military and political leaders had long been accustomed to dismissing Ukrainian operations as inconsequential. The belief was that Russia's superior military power would always be enough to repel any significant threat, but the events unfolding in Kursk challenged this assumption. This shift in tone was mirrored in the rhetoric of Russia's pro-war bloggers and propagandists. These individuals, who had previously been among the most vocal supporters of the war, they began to express doubt and concern. The bravado, which had characterized their commentary for so long, was giving way to a more somber and realistic assessment of the situation. It was becoming clear that this was not a fight that Russia could win easily, if at all. As the situation in Kursk evolved, it became clear that the Russian President Vladimir Putin was facing a very scary decision. For years, Putin has positioned himself as a strongman, a leader who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. But the events in Kursk revealed the limits of his power. The Russian military, once seen as an unstoppable force, was now struggling to respond to a determined and well-coordinated Ukrainian offensive. Putin's dilemma is rooted in the fact that he has few good options left. The Russian military is stretched thin, its resources depleted by years of sustained conflict. The invasion of Ukraine, which was supposed to be a quick and decisive victory, has instead turned into a grinding war of attrition. And now, with the Ukrainian forces pushing into Russian territory, the weaknesses of the Russian military are becoming more apparent than ever. One of the key indicators of this is the absence of a new mobilization effort. Despite the heavy losses Russia has suffered, Putin has not ordered a new wave of conscription. This isn't because the Russian military is performing well, no. The reality is far from it. Instead, it is because another round of mobilization would likely destabilize his regime. The last call-up in 2022 was deeply unpopular, sparking protests and unrest across the country. Many Russians who had previously been indifferent to the war, they suddenly found themselves directly affected, and the backlash was significant. Putin knows that another mobilization would likely provoke a similar response, potentially undermining his hold on power. But without new recruits, the Russian military is running out of manpower. The troops that are currently fighting in Kursk are not fresh recruits. They are seasoned soldiers who have been redeployed from other fronts. This has weakened Russia's position in other critical areas, creating a dilemma for Putin. He can either reinforce Kursk at the expense of other fronts or risk losing Russian territory to Ukrainian forces. Adding to Putin's dilemma is the fact that Russia's defense industry is struggling to keep up with the demands of the war. Missiles fired at Ukrainian cities bear markings from 2023 and 2024, indicating that they were produced recently. This suggests that Russia has managed to bypass some of the sanctions imposed by the West to acquire the components needed to build these weapons. But it also means that there is no surplus. Every single missile produced is immediately sent to the battlefield. The same is true for other military equipment like tanks, drones and ammunition. Russia's defense industry is operating at full capacity, but it is not enough to meet the demands of a prolonged conflict. One more thing about recruiting more people into the army. The sign-up bonuses already reached record levels, 2.5 million rubles or almost $30,000 in some regions. These are life-changing money for ordinary Russians, and still, everyone who ever got tempted by this money already signed the contracts with the Ministry of Defense. You can increase the sign-up bonuses even further, but it is unlikely to drastically increase recruitment results. Every new soldier will cost more and more money, and then if you do announce another round mobilization and start grabbing people from the streets and sending them to fight for Ukraine for free, well, I don't think that's gonna sit well with these people, that's for sure. Same with the military production. The salaries are incredibly high already. Those who work in factories, engineers, are already there. Talent people mostly left the country, so it's not like you can offer even more money and increase the production. Human capabilities are limited, and there are only 24 hours in a single day, so no matter how much money you pour into your defense industry, the production will not skyrocket. While Russia grapples with these challenges, Ukraine's Western allies have been surprisingly quiet, in a good way. In the past, any move by Ukraine that could have potentially escalated the conflict was met with caution from the West. There were fears that Russia might retaliate with overwhelming force, potentially even using nuclear weapons. But this time, the reaction has been different. Western leaders have remained calm, with little to no talk of potential escalation. This raises the question: have they finally realized that Putin's ability to escalate the war further is limited? The answer appears to be yes. After nearly 2 years of watching Russia's military strategy unfold, it seems that Western powers have concluded that Putin is already operating at his maximum capacity. They have seen that Russia's military is stretched thin, its resources depleted, and its ability to escalate the conflict further is severely constrained. This realization has led to a shift in Western policy. In the past, there were restrictions on the types of weapons that Ukraine could use, particularly those that could be used to strike targets inside Russia. The fear was that such attacks might provoke a massive retaliation from Moscow, but now Western leaders seem more willing to allow Ukraine to use the weapons as it sees fit. The focus has shifted from preventing escalation to supporting Ukraine in its efforts to defend itself and reclaim its territory. This shift in policy has been most evident in the types of weapons that are now being supplied to Ukraine. In addition to the standard military aid that has been flowing into the country since the start of the war, Ukraine is now receiving more advanced technology, including long-range missiles and sophisticated drones. These weapons are designed to not just defend against Russian attacks, but to strike deeper inside Russian-held territory, disrupting supply lines and targeting key military objects. The fact that Western leaders are willing to provide this level of support suggests that they believe Russia's capacity to respond is limited once again. They have seen that despite its threats, Russia has not escalated the conflict in a significant way. Instead, it has been forced to fight a defensive war, trying to hold onto territory it has already occupied, rather than launching new offensives. This has given Western leaders the confidence to continue supporting Ukraine even as the conflict moves closer to Russia's borders. What about the nuclear threats, you might ask? Then my question is the following. Which one of them? The one that Putin did 2 months ago? Or maybe the one he did last month? Maybe it was Medvedev last week? Or some unknown deputy this morning? That's the thing. The more nuclear threats you make, the less power they carry. No one cares about Putin's nuclear threats anymore. No one is afraid of them. As the conflict in Kursk continues to unfold, the future remains uncertain. Will Ukrainian forces be able to maintain their foothold in the region, or will they be pushed back by a desperate Russian counteroffensive? That is the question. What will be the long-term consequences for Russia if it loses control of Kursk, and how will this affect the broader war in Ukraine? These are difficult questions to answer, but one thing is clear. The events in Kursk have highlighted the limitations of Russia's military and strategic options. Putin is facing a crisis of his own making, and the decisions he makes in the coming days and weeks could have far-reaching consequences for the future of his regime. For Ukraine, the stakes are equally high. The incursion into Kursk is a bold move, one that carries significant risks, but it also offers the potential for significant rewards. If Ukraine can maintain its position in Kursk, it could deal a significant blow to Russian morale and potentially open up new opportunities for further advances. At the same time, the conflict in Kursk is a reminder of the broader challenges that Ukraine faces. Even as it makes gains on the battlefield, it must also contend with the realities of war. The loss of life, the destruction of infrastructure, and the displacement of millions of people. The war has already taken a devastating toll on Ukraine, and there is no end, unfortunately, in sight. As we continue to monitor the developments in Kursk and beyond, one thing is certain: the war in Ukraine is far from over. The decisions made by both sides in the coming days and weeks will shape the future of the conflict, and by extension, the future of Europe and the rest of the world. The incursion into Kursk marks a critical moment in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. What began as seemingly minor operation has evolved into a major military engagement with far-reaching implications. For Russia, the situation in Kursk has exposed the weaknesses of its military and the limitations of its strategic options. For Ukraine, it represents both a significant opportunity and a significant risk. As the conflict continues to unfold, the world watches with bated breath. The decisions made in the coming days and weeks will not only determine the outcome of the battle for Kursk, but could also shape the future of the entire war. We'll continue to keep you guys updated on the latest developments as they happen, so please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel if this was interesting, informative, or both. If you decide to support my work, there are links down below: PayPal donations, Patreon subscriptions, the Russian Dude merch. Everything is down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe